Welcome back. Now, could South Africans be facing a week of tax shocks? Well, if the Sunday Times report is correct, that could be the actual case. So the newspaper has reported that there is a consideration of hiking several taxes and possibly introducing new ones to cover a massive budget shortfall. Now, citing anonymous insiders, the paper said that VAT hikes, fuel levy hikes, sin tax hikes, and many other tax charges could impact personal and company taxes have been under discussion, while a wealth tax may be introduced. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Yasmeen Suliman, who is a tax partner at Bowman Gilfillan. Yasmeen, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah so much for joining us.
Alaikum salam. Good to be on your show.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Yasmeen, should South Africans be worried?
I think it's hard to say. It's that time of the year where there's a lot of speculation, and the reality is that we do have a shortfall on the revenue collection side. But I don't think it's as easy as just raising some the tax rates and then expecting the tax take to actually increase as a result. I think there's a lot of speculation about the VAT rate being increased. And realistically, that's the only real lever to actually collect a large amount of tax in one swoop. So an increase of 1% on the VAT rate, is equivalent of about 30 billion rand in additional revenue. And because the net is quite wide, it impacts everybody. Then the ability to actually dodge that is actually quite difficult. But I think that must be looked at in the context of our economy. To be honest, I think our economy is not in the best state at the moment, and to be able and the effect is that of having tax hikes, will just damage, I think, our economy a bit more. Our consumers are really under pressure, and honestly, I can't see how they can absorb additional tax hikes. In addition to everything else that they've been having to contend with over the last few years.
Yasmeen, I mean, we have to look at the last time value-added tax was raised, 2017. That was, of course, a 1% to take it to that 15%. I listened to an interview that Edward Kieswet, the South African Revenue Service Commissioner, said that, and he made quite an interesting point. He says, okay, we're going to raise the value-added tax, but that doesn't really solve South Africa's issue. Are you in agreement with him?
I think he's right. I don't know what his motivation was or what his reasoning was. But I think it was Winston Churchill who said that you can't tax yourself, a country can't tax itself into prosperity.
Sure.
Tax is a lever by which you fund expenditure. And our problem is not really a revenue issue, it's more of an expenditure issue. I think the vast majority of South Africans believe that we pay too much of tax. And I think the reality is that, a lot of the tax money does get squandered. We hear stories, there are, various newspaper reports on the level of fraud and corruption. And having spoken to businessmen, spoken to people who work in government and so on, I think the level of malfeasance, if I can put it that way, is actually quite deep-rooted. So I don't think we get value for money. And I think that it's a difficult thing to manage. But just increasing tax rates is not the answer. We do have a very small tax base, and if it's a tax like the direct tax, like a corporate tax or personal income tax that were to be increased, actually I think we'll get diminishing returns. I don't think there's any I think there's no appetite on the part of taxpayers to part more with more of their money if they know it's going to be wasted.
Yasmeen, I want to touch on personal tax because I think it impacts employees across the board, those of course getting taxed, whatever the actual tax bracket is. And I have to ask, I mean, if you're a South African right now, you kind of, I won't say shivering, but you kind of, having this a pessimistic outlook, and that's going to be the case now for the next couple of hours before Minister Godongwana delivers his budget speech. Where are we in terms of what government is going to try and implement in terms of personal tax? I ask this because if there's one way that Treasury may look at, this is one where they may say, well, it has to be under consideration and it needs to be done.
Yes, I think they have used it as a means to raise revenue in the last few years. So we had a year or two where the tax brackets weren't adjusted for inflation, and just by not adjusting for inflation, there's an additional amount of revenue that is collected. But there is an economic theory. There's a famous economist called Arthur Laffer, and his theory was as tax rates go higher, the amount of taxes you actually collect decreases. And we saw it very clearly when the tax rate moved, the highest marginal tax rate moved from 41% to 45%. In the immediate year thereafter, the personal tax collections actually dropped off. So there's more of more incentive for taxpayers to indulge in avoidance and evasion activities. Whereas if the rates were at a palatable level, it's easier for them to be compliant. Now, taxpayers are looking for any means to not declare certain types of income. For example, if you're renting out your granny flat, why declare that and let SARS take a bite out of it? If you're running a small business on the side, or if you've got a side hustle, don't declare that income and so on. So it's easier to do that when the tax rates are so unpalatable. I think that while personal income tax is a means for SARS to actually to collect more in terms, even if all they did was not give us the inflationary relief, but I don't think that's a great impact on the economy. I mean, at the end of the day, the economic activity needs to be stimulated, and one of the ways to do that is through spending. And the less people have to spend, the less there is, the economic activity is going to happen. So for me, I don't think it's going to be the best way to deal with the fiscal problems that we do have. I do think that, I think we're at a point where taxpayers are actually quite fed up. We are taxed to a point where it's actually uneconomical to work more, right? Because you're paying for the tax and then you're paying for all sorts of other things that you would get in another country as part of your social services. Sure. And you have to refund that all personally as well. So I don't think we necessarily, the taxpayers who do contribute to specifically personal income tax don't really necessarily get, value for money.
Yasmeen, President Cyril Ramaphosa, obviously head of the G20, has said that there has to be a 15% tax on the wealthy across the world, especially those who are earning the billions and the, dare I say, even the trillions. Will Ramaphosa, will Treasury, will government obviously look onto their own doorsteps and actually implement a wealth tax, whatever amount that they see fit to go ahead and execute this?
So, look, there's been a lot of speculation about the wealth tax. I think it's debatable whether it's actually going to raise a lot of revenue. I don't think it's going to be an easy tax to implement, certainly not within the next year. I think the commentary process will have to be long and robust. And I think there'll be a lot of pushback from taxpayers. And also bear in mind that the wealth tax, a lot of wealthy people don't actually own their assets themselves. A lot of them use, vehicles such as trusts. They have companies, all of whom are taxpayers, pay legitimate taxes, but they don't actually own a lot of wealth in their own names. And so I think there may be a limited scope to actually generate a lot of money out of a wealth tax. I do think that SARS will have to throw quite a lot of resources at it to collect that kind of money. And we wouldn't, I think there may be estimates to say, well, we're going to collect maybe 200 billion rands from a wealth tax, but that would be short-lived. People in that category are quite mobile. We've seen, and I've assisted clients personally on this, we've seen a lot of wealthy individuals exit the tax system in South Africa through financial immigration. And for various reasons, not only tax reasons, but tax was one of the factors they considered, And I think we're just giving them the impetus to move out. And remember, when they do, we don't only lose out on this new wealth tax, it will be all the other things that that are associated with having a warm body in the country. So the income tax related to their earnings, as well as the VAT that they would have spent on their consumption spending and so on. So for me, if I look at South Africa, I think for the size of the tax base that we have, I think that the small tax base is overtaxed. And I think the ability to squeeze more blood from that stone is going to be limited.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think Arthur Laffer is quite right. I think you'll see a definite drop-off in the level of investment and then tax take as a result.
Yasmeen, Jazakallah so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's Yasmeen Suliman, who is a tax partner at Bowman Gilfillan. Well, to wrap up the conversation, I'm going to be speaking to trade unions and none other than South African Federation of Trade Unions with regards to what is it they're expecting and, of course, what they are hoping Minister Godongwana would not be mentioning in tomorrow's budget speech. Do stay tuned.